Hello, everybody. I'm Silva Harapetian. Welcome to another edition of our show. I am so excited today. I know I say this every time, but I've been wanting to do this particular type of interview for so long because I am an immigrant. I am a woman. I came to this country when I was 14 years old. So I have lived a life that many of you can relate to, having to manage my culture and the Western culture, having to figure my way out through different scenarios and circumstances, particularly since I was the oldest in the family. And I know a lot of people think about this or feel things, but many of us don't know how to verbalize it. Many of us don't know how to actually find the words to articulate a lot of what we're going to be talking about today. So if you're here, you're all about growth, you're about expansion, you're about bettering yourself and empowering yourself. You are in the right place today. Again, I'm Silva Harapetian. My guest today, Pauline Yernazaar-Peck. She is a licensed psychologist. I should say Dr. Pauline Yernazaar-Peck. I got to give you props for the work that you've done. She's a licensed psychologist here in California. She's also licensed in New York. She's a coach, she's a speaker. She's just all around badass. And she works with immigrants, particularly immigrant women and children.
Yeah.
Thank you for being here.
Appreciate it. I'm excited to be here too.
I have to tell you that I've been following you on Instagram for some time.
Amazing.
And full disclosure, we're kind of related through marriage of our families. But one of the things that really stood out for me when I was watching your content was how you've been able to find the words to the experiences and the feelings that we all experience, but sometimes don't have the words for. I personally had to struggle to find those words. And it wasn't until I went through some challenges through my career and some challenges through my personal life that I started writing about them that I then was able to find some words to put into associate with the emotions.
Yeah.
Talk to me about how much of that you see in your practice and with your clients.
Yeah, well, I know just from my own life experience that finding the words to author our story is the most important part of feeling like you're engaged in your life, that you're the author of your life, the creator of your life, a dynamic part of your life rather than life happening to you. And it's that shift from a victim standpoint to an empowered standpoint is to be able to narrate your story, narrate even the hardest parts, the most difficult parts. And there's something really magical that happens when we're able to put into words an experience that felt really overwhelming or isolating or shameful or difficult, that there's a catharsis that happens. There's a sense of relief that happens. When we're able to put it into words, like I do with my videos, somebody else can absorb that. And to add on to that, even if it's not their exact same experience, maybe there's a part of that that then helps them uncover their own story. So I think our narratives, our stories, and being able to be the author of our own stories rather than what we were told our story should be, what we were expected to be in our stories, I think that's a really important and kind of foundational part of how I've come to be where I am, as well as the work that I do with people, is to help them to see themselves as not some side character, but really an active agent in their own lives. And sometimes it's just the powerful shift of it happened to me to being able to reframe that to something that feels more empowering, more hopeful, more graceful, more self-compassionate. And that small shift can be really powerful. Even knowing there's a word for it or a frame for it, that can be really powerful.
Oh my gosh, she just took 3 minutes to answer a question, but there is so much to unpack in that just response. First and foremost, I want to talk about the importance of story, the significance of story. I've been a storyteller my whole life.
Yeah.
I have told other people's stories. I champion people telling their stories. And one of the things that I am really proud of is being able to show up even in public spaces, even on social media, as my vulnerable self.
Yeah.
Within standing in my own truth. Because one thing you said, what I've discovered is that when you are able to show your vulnerability and tell your story, you are giving other people permission to do the same or to show up in their truth. And we don't see that often enough or even enough especially in the curated social media age of public personalities, right? And I want you to talk about that, particularly since you posted something yesterday that was quite emotional
Yeah.
and really vulnerable, and a lot of people wouldn't show up crying on social media.
Yeah.
I've done it before, and I sometimes people it's the most response I get when I show up really vulnerable. Talk to me about the significance of taking up space, living within your story, and also digging deep and discovering what those narratives are and how important that is to our lives.
Yeah, I want to even go a step back and say storytelling is really universal to our humanity. Before we had written documents, we had oratory ways of being able to transmit information, be able to have powerful lessons that someone could learn, to be able to champion certain character traits, to be an encouragement or a source of resilience and resource.
Inspiration.
And so it's inspiration, absolutely. So information, knowledge, inspiration, encouragement, lessons, like what not to do can come from lessons. So that's a powerful common human experience. It's to gravitate towards stories and gravitate toward the genuine expression of stories that teach us, that inspire us, that motivate us, that get us to think about our own stories. So it's really going back to the basics of our humanity, right? This is not just because of the social media age and how to tell a story to market something. It's really intrinsic to being human. What do children most want is tell me a story. Tell me a story to calm me, to soothe me, to teach me something.
Right.
And children will remember those stories and will take those stories along with us. So it's really foundational to us being human. And where we disconnect is when the story we're expected to fill up, the cultural expectations, the things that we need to do or not do in order to survive, it disconnects us from our own stories, from our own lived experiences.
From who we are.
From who we are.
From who we are,
From who we are. And being able to come back to stories is actually a powerful reclamation of ancestral wisdom through the ways in which the story of who we were was passed down to us, and that, like I said, active engagement with who we want to be. Stories can also be aspirational, not just inspirational. And the beautiful thing that you said was that when we tell a story that we know because we've lived it, we know because it's true to us, even if someone cannot relate to the exact piece of it, there is something energetically that locks them, that gives them permission and unlocks within them that it's okay to show up in the story that we're in.
And who you are, and exactly where you are in the imperfect way that you are, because I think there's so much perfection in the world that people feel like they can't be who they are because it doesn't measure up to the perfection that they see on social media, or the stereotype of this perfection of who we're supposed to be as immigrant daughters. And you and I know a thing or two about that, is that we don't live up to this expectation, so therefore we don't show up at all, or we show up with a perception of perfection that is so disconnected from who we really are and what's really going on in our lives. And what happens is, I found that if you show up that way, then you don't allow other people to show up for you, which is what you were talking about yesterday, right? If you continue to show up fake, if you continue to show up not as your authentic self, then everybody else and the way they interact with you is not authentic. And it's not real. So not only are you robbing them of what they can give you, but you're also robbing yourself of what you should be receiving. Talk to me about that.
It's this like twofold piece, like you're talking about how I showed up vulnerably yesterday. In some ways, I needed it. Like I needed to be seen in process with what was real to me that day. And in doing that, I was able to also give permission to other people. One, to love on me, right? As somebody who's doling out and giving, which a lot of immigrant daughters are, whether or not you're a psychologist, that sometimes it's really nice to be on the receiving end, and people are at their nature altruistic. They want to reach out. They want to give of themselves. That's another human trait that we all have. And so if you're never showing up in process, then you're cutting yourself off from your own truth, but you're also cutting somebody off from being able to give to you in a way that allows them to feel of value, to feel connected, to feel integrated in the community and in the whole. And so yesterday I had this real question to say, okay, will this be of value? And then I thought, well, is it of value to me? Like, first and foremost, it has to be a story that I need to tell, that feels true to where I am in that moment. And my value is transparency. Transparency and honesty are two of my high personal values. And so that felt like, yeah. And then secondary to that is somebody could see this and think, it's okay to cry. It's okay to let your body express what it needs to express. It's okay to receive the love that is possible from people that are in your community. He was talking about being hugged by a stranger in a grocery store.
But also emotions are not linear.
Yeah.
And they don't just show up when you're alone by yourself perfectly in your bedroom or
Journaling.
in the bathroom or right, like it doesn't, emotions are not that way. Like I lost my dad last year, and this whole year this has been really an experience for me because the emotions show up at the most unexpected places, and I've just had to just go with the flow and live with it because I don't want to not feel it. And while I am strong and I'm hard on the exterior, I also sort of know the value of not suppressing your emotions, right?
Of course.
So it really odd ways. I I was at a friend's house, and he said, "Hey, go look at my classic car." And I opened the door and walked into the garage, and the whiff of the mechanical stuff that has to do with a classic vehicle hit me in the face, and I just lost it because my dad was a mechanic, and my dad smelled like that all the time. When he would walk in the door, I could smell him, and it was on his clothes, it was on his body, and his presence was all of a sudden just so overwhelming. And I had no control over the emotion, just like you said yesterday. You were at Whole Foods, and there was a waterworks, and being able to say, I know it, I feel it, I recognize it, I can put words to it, and this is just an emotion and feeling that I'm going through, and I can just go with the flow. And if impact someone else or someone wants to judge me for it, then that's on them and not necessarily me.
Yeah, and it goes from it's real to I'm real. Our stories make us feel real.
Yeah.
This is real.
And my grief is real.
My grief is real. My emotions are real. And really, stories shape culture. So if the only stories that we're telling are the curated ones, right? Within my space, it's the immigrant that made it, right? You do the struggle, but then you become the good immigrant, and then you're succeeding according to the rules of assimilation. If we only tell certain stories, we continuously make those the benchmark for what should be. Rather than when
which is in so many cases so unrealistic.
Very unrealistic and very narrow.
People take out so many of the struggles and so many of the challenges and the times that they didn't make it, that the times that they were pushed down, the times that they I have found within my career the best part of the stories is the struggle.
Yeah, but they take a 3D story and make it 2D.
Right.
It's the sound bite, it's the highlight reel. And in doing that, we continuously reinforce that that's the story, but that's not the story.
Yeah, you can't get to that without the struggle.
No, and to be in process with our stories, because you forget it, right? In hindsight, you forget some of that pain. You forget the struggles because, whew, now you've made it and you're not in survival mode anymore. And that's why it was so important. There's going to be days where I have it all together and I'm not always crying, right? I don't mean on camera, I just mean in general. And in that moment, I thought it's important to share this as it is happening. I had someone message me at the end because I did quite a few different stories at different times yesterday. And she's like, I just feel like I saw you have an entire emotional experience in real time. And I thought, how powerful.
And pull it together, take something out of it, and then, exactly.
Because that's what you'll never be just in the emotion constantly. It comes and then it will subside. That's what an emotion is. It's a neurochemical, electrochemical thing, cannot last forever. But somebody being able to see that and then seeing, oh, a psychologist can do that. Oh, a daughter of immigrants can do that. That is expanding the story. And the more diversity we have of stories, of voices in process, true to what we are, we're actually shaping culture because we're expanding what we think should be. We're expanding the various possibilities of being, of showing up. There is no one immigrant. There is no one immigrant experience.
And there's no one way to be.
Exactly. Exactly. And it comes back to those values that then get enacted. And so that is the importance of storytelling. The same story coming from different people can have a different thing and hit you in a different way. It is so essential that we not turn our 3D stories into 2D stories, that we not lose our stories, because losing our stories, especially when the greater culture is not echoing those same stories, there's already a cultural erasure. I'm not going to learn about my people in school. I didn't growing up. You have to get that outside. Our stories are essential for keeping our cultures alive. If not, there will be a cultural erasure, and we will be doing that to ourselves.
Yeah. I love this. I'm like celebrating internally here that we're talking about stories, because a lot of you know that this is really my lane. I've spent my entire life telling stories, and I teach storytelling, the power of storytelling, how to tell your stories. There's people that want to do it professionally.
Yeah.
There's people that want to do it for marketing. There's people that want to do it because they want to speak on stage. There's people who want to do it simply for their own growth and empowerment, right? And it is actually, it's an emotional process, but it's also an art. It's an art form. There's actually a process to telling stories.
Yeah.
There's and one of the ways is the process story, which is what you talked about, is that being able to kind of go, I'm not going to wait to do this when I'm perfect or when I've arrived.
Yeah.
I'm going to do it while I'm in process. And I think this is the thing that many people miss, is that they wait to graduate, they wait to achieve something, they wait to some sort of destination before they acknowledge their story or their experience, when in reality that process to whatever it is that you're trying to get to is actually a more important story, and there's a way to tell that story. I know that that's probably what you see within your practice, especially with a lot of immigrants that you work with, right? People are trying to uncover what process that they're in.
Yeah, and really at the heart of it, everybody wants to know that they're not alone, that they're not altogether that different from others, that there's not something inherently wrong with them. And when you hear someone tell a story and they're imperfect and they're human and they're in process, everybody can relate to that. Yeah.
And it's
the beauty is the shared humanity in that. You're able to say, oh, wow, okay, I can see myself in that story. And although I work with children of immigrants and immigrants from so many different diverse ethnic backgrounds, racial backgrounds, sexual orientation, so many different diverse pieces, there are some common elements, and it is wanting to know that we're not alone, that we're not somehow wholly different than somebody else. And stories really allow us to be able to do that. Now, I also want to bring up another point, which is, in order to tell our story fully and truthfully, there needs to be some element of safety as well. And I think that there's a lot of responsibility placed on the individual to tell their full story, but they have to have enough safety. And what I mean by safety is, are there financial consequences, other economic consequences, relational consequences to telling that story? And we have to take that into account when we're talking about immigrant stories, because there are real consequences to standing up and saying, this happened to me. And you see that whenever you speak to power, whenever you say this happened to me and it wasn't my fault, whenever you are empowered to own your story, there are going to be real consequences, relational, familial, community-wise,
Backlash,
again,
all of that,
And so I think it's a really, it's like holding two things at the same time. Yes, I want to help people to tell their stories. And sometimes those stories for a period of time need to happen with the confidence of a trusted professional,
right,
or a coach, or somebody in a safe place that can hear that story, even believe that story. I'm thinking of survivors of trauma. Like, they told their story and they were not believed, and then that story gets suppressed. And so it's really important that when that story comes out, it is believed. It's not questioned. It is really believed. This happened to you. You experienced this.
And that there is value to acknowledging what happened. I want to go back to what you just said. This is so interesting because while I understand what you're saying about there needing to be safety and that there is consequences, I have a completely different experience to that, because for me personally, the story and the power of it and standing truth to power has always been more important and significant than the safety of it.
Yep.
And that's not, and I recognize now more so in this conversation than ever, that that's not necessarily true for everyone.
Right.
Because the risk of telling that story or standing within that story and taking space with that sometimes people aren't willing or able to take.
Yes.
So there's something to be said about that. But it's interesting that I'm just now recognizing that I actually never really take the risk and the consequences into account.
Yeah.
Because I've also seen people who are hesitant in sharing their story, and they share it, and then the power of it is more healing,
Yeah.
and the impact of it is more healing than they would have had they sort of tiptoed around it on some level. And I'm not saying that you should do it one way or another, but it's interesting that we've had different perspectives and experiences with that.
Yeah, and I think it's so important to be able to see things like whether it's our story, whether it's our mental health, as not just happening within us, but happening within us and in interaction with the environment. That it's not somebody not having enough courage to tell their story.
Right.
It's maybe in so many different ways they've been told that whatever your truth is, we don't care.
Yeah.
You don't matter.
Right.
That's something we're going to reject. You're going to be outstoried, right? Whose voice is more important, whose voice is listened to.
Right.
And so you never know what somebody's experience is. And as somebody that is invited into the sacred spaces of people's lives, sometimes people need, even within therapy, months and months before they're willing to trust you enough to open up elements of their story. And I never see that as them lacking courage. I see it as me having to earn trust because this person has learned that the risks were not worth telling their story. And they have to trust me enough that I can hold that story, that I won't adjust or edit it or superimpose upon it, that it's okay for them to be able to say that I won't lose myself with the horrificness of the story. Because sometimes when you tell somebody the story, they say, oh, that's too heavy, please say less. And they may not say it explicitly, but they say, please edit yourself, or this is too much for me, right? A story of grief, a story of what happened to you. Like, I hear really, really difficult stories. So I think it's just important to take into account, these are not just things happening within us. These are things that are happening within us and the environment, what's going on at that time, whether it's your family, whether it's greater society, whether it's the zeitgeist of the times and what's happening globally. All of these things impact you. And it is so important that we begin having a relationship with our own stories, even just by asking about the stories from our families. You won't always get the full truth, but just beginning to ask, be curious about them, begin to write about them in your own journal, not even without sharing them. Just being in touch with our own stories is so powerful. And as a lot of children of immigrants, we don't have the documentation historically. We have so many threads that are lost in the mix from our families, names changed, documents gone, no archives for things that happened to us. Stories become an essential heirloom. They become our way of staying connected to the past. So whether or not you have the external safety now or yet or ever does not change that you can still have a relationship to your own story and to be authentic internally. And that's a resource. That's a safety that you can hold on to, even when the environment is not ready for it yet.
I want to talk a little bit about, I hope you all took away something from this conversation. How powerful your story is, regardless of what it is.
Yes.
We all have powerful stories. I am a firm believer of that. I spent 25 years proving people that their stories matter.
Yes.
So we all have stories. Your stories matter. It's important that you tell it in the most authentic way possible, and that our stories evolve.
Yeah.
And you can tell it in any format that you see fit, whether it's on stage or within the privacy of a psychologist or even in your journals. So those things are important. And in relation to that, I want to marry the importance of our narrative and our stories to mental health.
Yeah.
Because there is a huge stigma within immigrant communities about mental health. Can you simplify what mental health means?
Yeah. It's really at the most basic level. It's the landscape of your emotions, thoughts, and behaviors. So there is something that's very broad with it. Taking care of your mental health is just like taking care of your physical health. There are certain things that as humans help us to be in a place where we feel safe, where we feel comfortable, where we're able to thrive. And
What are those things? Because as an immigrant child,
yes,
I don't know.
yes,
what
let's
those
break
things
them
are.
up. So
what are those things?
relationships,
Yeah.
solid relationships that you know you can turn to right? Sometimes even research gets down to one person that you know you could call at any hour of the day that would be there for you. So a safe, reliable, dependable person who loves you and will show up for you. So we all need relationships at some level in order to be able to have our mental health thrive, right? Just even basic biology, meaning that we are mostly within our window of tolerance. So we're not in hyperdrive, which is the anxiety panic state, and we're not in a shutdown and collapse, which is more of like a depressive state. That we are in a place where we can have enough resources to be able to attend to the things that we need without constantly pushing our bodies and our psyches to their extremes.
Can I just say,
Yes.
and I know you have more to unpack with that, it is incredibly difficult because living in the community now, in the Glendale, Burbank, Pasadena area, and being really entrenched within the Armenian, Iranian, Middle Eastern community, one of the things that I notice is that there is a lack of awareness around all of that.
Yeah.
There's like people don't have awareness about the fact that they've been pushed to the brink, right? That they are in the anxiety state, or they are in the survival state, or that they are in the sort of depressed state. There's lack of awareness of themselves
Yeah.
and of their environment, right? Talk to me a little bit about where that comes from.
Yeah, well, awareness of these things is also a privilege. Awareness of these things is also a resource. If you are in a survival mindset, you're not going to have that awareness. If you didn't get taught these things, you're not going to have that awareness. Everybody understands my body feels bad, my body feels good, right? You have basic physical sensations, and physical sensations can link to emotional states. But if your emotions were never validated, they weren't labeled, they weren't explained to you, their functions were not taught to you. These are literal, when we say there's lack of awareness, what we're saying is people have not been taught the basics of it from like a literal biological standpoint, as well as the psychological standpoint of like, we have 5 universal emotions. This is what an emotion is. This is why we have it. And so, you know, again, when we see that our immigrant communities don't have that awareness, first and foremost, I was actually just talking about this with somebody at lunch. We talked about how in our cultures, we don't have mental health as a separate category the way we do in Western cultures, because we also don't have a lot of silos of the physical body, the emotional body, and the spiritual body. These things are intrinsic. There's so many words, whether it's in Farsi, whether it's in Persian, whether it's in Armenian, a deldar, they're like, oh, my stomach hurts. That could also be like, I'm anxious. But you use a physical thing that's happening with your body to also talk about an emotional state. So I don't like this. We don't have mental health in immigrant communities. Of course we do. We just don't see the body as segmented in the way that like Western psychology sees the body, the spirit, and the mind as separate entities, and they're studied very separately. Even the body is studied. You've got a cardiologist and a pulmonologist and a, you know, radiologist, rather than like in Chinese medicine where you have the entire body working in systems with holistic care, with naturopathic care, where one system impacts another system. So what we didn't get was an explanation maybe of those emotions because our families maybe didn't have it to give to us, that particular training that now I've gotten as a psychologist. But what we did get was maybe you need soothing or comfort. I'll make you tea. And a recognition that something emotionally might be happening, even if I'm not explicitly telling you about the emotions, that this is how they operate.
Yeah.
People pray for you. People cook for you. People physically might love on you. People make you chicken soup.
People bring you sweet things, but sweet treats. But I want to touch on something that you said. You know, I don't think our families had the privilege of feeling those emotions.
Right.
I don't think, you know, when you think about my family who, you know, survived the war in Iran, right? And escaped Iran and ended up just kind of up in the air for 2 years in Germany, and then, you know, stumbled our way into the United States and then try to figure life out in a Western country with no language, not understanding this, like our families, a lot of immigrant families simply did not have the privilege and the luxury of feeling those emotions.
Yeah.
You don't have the luxury of being depressed. You don't have the luxury of feeling down or anxious or even think about those things, because your priority is to survive.
Yeah, and these are also unconscious physical and physiological processes that are happening that you're not choosing to happen, right? When your body is operating in a survival mindset, you are going to shut down certain things. Just like when you're in a stress response, fight, flight, freeze, fawn, right? You don't have the rest and digest system. And you need some level of rest to know the threat is gone. You don't need to know that you're feeling anxious. You need to move out of the way so the car doesn't hit you.
Right.
So you will always, your body is geared towards survival, and it will shut down certain mechanisms when it deems that your literal survival is based on it. That's why so much of my work comes from a deep, loving compassion for our immigrant communities. Because the stories we say about our immigrant communities, they don't know about mental health, they're so behind, they don't, I'm not saying you're saying that, but when we have that, which I see in so many first gen, second gen, third gen, is really not seeing that these are trauma responses that our family didn't choose. This is what a body does. A body does this to survive. Right. And that without the information, without the permission, without the literal safety of knowing when your next meal is going to come, emotions will be luxuries. Your body literally suppresses them in order to make sure that your basic biological needs are met. And then the way that our cultures think about mental health is really different. And so I think of increasing awareness about mental health as an additive model. We're not taking something from the Western world and then giving it to our poor, impoverished communities that know nothing about psychology. We're saying this is additive, right? You had the tea, and also there's a word for it. And this can help when we're feeling that way. When we talk about something, there's a relief that happens. So there's an additive piece that I work to have a lot of children of immigrants see that, they can bring these resources that they're getting back into their communities, not with shame and judgment, like you're so behind, get with the program, but in this loving way where they realize the survival that my parents went through, the survival mechanisms, I should say, that they employed, kept me alive enough for me to have the luxury. So yeah, my dad didn't have the luxury of getting the PhD in psychology, but there's no way I would have gotten it without him. And my gaining these resources becomes a loving duty to bring them back, because he has been a part of why I'm here, why I do what I do. And so there's a lot of judgment, right? You're not in touch with your emotions. Well, did you have the space?
Right.
Did you have the language?
Right.
What happened when you did share?
Right.
Right? Huge power differentials. When you're an immigrant, you try to be the best immigrant ever, right? You don't want to have any problems because you need to be in good health in every way, shape, and form. So literally people were hiding illnesses, physical illnesses, and to their own detriment.
You need to exemplify the American dream.
Exactly.
You need
exactly.
to exemplify
so
the
story
American
is, we're
dream.
all good here.
With a doctor degree or a law degree or whatever it may be. In the process, your body might be breaking down, and you
Completely.
might all of that. Part of the reason I want to have this conversation is because I've had the privilege of exploring some of those things, and I've had the privilege of experiencing some of the healing powers of awareness, of mental health, of paying attention to my physical body, particularly this last year going through grief. Just the physical manifestation of that grief has been extremely difficult to sort of manage. But at the same time, I think education, awareness, us talking about it more, and also saying that there is no stigma around mental health. There is no stigma, like it's okay to not be okay.
Yeah.
It's okay to have questions about these things. It's okay to say, you know what, I've put on 50 pounds in the last year. And it's not because I'm a bad person or that I didn't try or that I wasn't working out or that I ate too much. It's because my body, my physical presence, right, is experiencing the traumas that it has never experienced before. And the awareness comes from having grace for myself, and also learning to have grace for other people, because everybody is going through something, right? Whether they show it or not, everybody is going through something. Sometimes I just stop and I'm like, are you okay? Like, you know, when there's tense conversations or conflict, because you realize life is hard and everybody's got something.
Yeah.
But if this conversation inspires someone to look deeper into what they're feeling or why they've been feeling some physical symptoms of whatever it is that they've been feeling, or
Yeah.
why they've needed more support or more friendship, or why they felt more alone, or if it inspires you to explore more, then I think we've done our job,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. And to be able to, I think these are things that need to be taught at a basic level to everybody as just part of education. The same way that you learn how to take care of your teeth, and that if you don't take care of it, this is what happens. And maybe there's a little bit of shame in eating too many sweets, not brushing your teeth, and you get a cavity, but it doesn't carry the same stigma as when you're falling depressed.
Right.
And we don't ask, what did we embed? What did we take in? What was going on socially? What was going on in our lives? Like, we don't ask some of those environmental questions. We make it a personal failing, right? Even weight, right? I'm not a medical doctor, but we don't look at what happened in somebody's life. I've seen so many survivors of trauma put on weight as a way to push others away, as a way to literally encase themselves because they don't want to be vulnerable. And that gives them an extra layer of protection. So we are such just wise beings, and there's so much happening. And I think that we just don't get education to destigmatize. And I think when we share our stories, linking it to that, when we share our stories, we destigmatize something. We say, oh, this is somebody having a reaction to a friend dying. Oh, this is what can happen when you move to a new place and you have no friends or family and you're under a lot of stress. We begin seeing these things as the impact of environmental things on a person rather than failings in a person. And that shift can be a huge shift. And I see it happening. This is the exciting part, is I see it happening within our immigrant communities. Just several weeks ago, I was at MIT at a conference, and 30% of the audience, 60 and above, conversations were being had in that room across generations that brought tears to my eyes. Because the older generation now, being in the country for longer, being more settled, not being in survival mode, maybe being retired, there's so much more openness to this, which tells you this wasn't an inherent failing of them. This wasn't ignorance in the sense that they don't want to learn. This was them being in survival and not getting to learn. And by me being there, I can't tell you how many aunties and uncles I hugged afterwards that said, thank you so much. I learned so much today, right? That's the power of what we have here, is recognizing these are things about nervous system regulation, understanding our bodies and how our bodies respond under stress, and then how that can look with, you know, various emotional
that looks
expressions.
like. Sometimes, you know, I've had to learn this about myself, right? Like there's certain times when anxiety shows up. It's not a delhore for me, as we say, right?
Yeah.
It's not this pit in my stomach that I feel that, you know, makes mom want to make me tea. When I get that, I start scrubbing things. And it took me forever to put those two things together. I start scrubbing things. I will get a toothbrush out.
Yeah.
And I will scrub places that do not need scrubbing. I will take out vegetables and I will chop. Like my life depends on it.
Right.
It's something about that. So it took forever for me to figure out, to put that physical manifestation of that emotion together with, you know what, this is how anxiety shows up for me in my body and physically. And when that happens, now that I have awareness around it, then now I'm like, okay, what do I need to do to soothe myself? Right? And all of these things are learned, and it comes over time, and it's a process, is what I've learned, and every day it's something new, right? If you put yourself in a mindset that you want to have this awareness, that you want to be in a better mental state, that you want to have a better physical health and better mental health, and that you want to improve your relationship with other people around you. If you just put yourself in a state that you want that, then you open and invite these things into your life, and it's a learning experience as you go. And one of my favorite phrases nowadays is that I don't know what I don't know, and I don't know. I just don't.
And it's, you know, I think part of this, again, going back to the stories, is when we are told that we don't matter and that our internal experience doesn't matter, whether it's through childhood, whether it's never seeing somebody like us or that has our background make it, we, you know, whether we've been through traumatized backgrounds, right? All of these things warps our view of ourself and our view of the world. And a lot of times immigrants can have that story told to them. Refugees can have that story to them. You should just be so grateful you're here. Right? Not that you should have a sense of thriving or that your well-being matters, but that you're from this place, that's less than. You should be so grateful that you're here. And that story does not really have somebody lean into, I'm worth feeling good.
Yeah.
I'm worth having my feelings acknowledged.
And that I could be grateful and also upset.
Yeah.
I can also be grateful and also criticize.
Yeah.
For me, the moment I recognized that was that I was writing an article, and I haven't published it yet. I'll get to it. I was questioning the systems in which this country uses to operate, and how so many of those systems fail so many women and immigrants.
Yes.
Right? And then I found myself wondering, how do I articulate that? Because over the years, what I've articulated is that I'm blessed to be in this country where there's freedom because of where I came from. Because had I not left, I may not be alive, right? Or I may not have had the same opportunities. And I found myself in this conflicting crossroads, a fork in the road of being grateful, but at the same time questioning the system, or questioning where I was, or questioning how things are progressing.
Yeah, we talk about moving from an either or to a both and.
To a both
you can
and,
be both,
right?
Both grateful and critical. Could
And
this serve
critical.
things better?
Thank you. So that's been sort of eye-opening for me in recognizing that one thing led to me going, I can be this and this, or I can feel this way and that way. And because they're so conflicting, I think our bodies don't know how to and or versus it's either this or that. But we're so complex as humans, and our emotions are so complex, and we're so layered that we can be both things.
Yeah, we
And
can be more than two things too.
We can
be multiple things at one time. And we have metacognition, so you can think something, feel something, and then think something about what you're thinking and feeling, and then think something about what you're thinking and it can just go in layers and layers and layers.
Now I feel like we're in the Matrix.
Right. It is kind of like that, where we have such an awareness. The more you build awareness, the more awareness you're going to build. And then you have meta levels of cognition, right? And that's why you can feel guilty, and then you can feel guilty about feeling guilty. And then you can feel, guilty about feeling guilty about feeling guilty. And it just can keep going. And so all that to say is that we have to believe that we are worth being tended to, that it's okay to be in a place where we choose a sense of internal peace, that we don't deserve to suffer, that it doesn't make us bad or ungrateful if we also struggle. Like, these are the stories that people need to truly incorporate and believe in order to even be incentivized to be aware. Because why be aware if I just think life is suffering and I deserve to suffer, and I should just be okay with whatever I'm going to get? That person's not going to be incentivized to change a mindset, to then feel, okay, I'm going to become aware of how I feel. I'm going to be aware of when I'm tired and have a seat and rest. Why would I be aware if I just think this is what needs to be done in order for me to survive, or this is what I've been told life is? And I think that's where we've taken things that are actually responses, trauma responses, or remnants of trauma that have been infused into culture, and we call them culture, but they're not really culture. The responses that we had to the environment. Shutting down your emotions is a temporary, very adaptive, functional response to something that is happening. It is not meant to be an entire identity. And especially, I've written about this too in the Armenian Weekly just recently in April. I was featured in talking about how we have built an identity around grief, and really looking at being a genocided people. We've taken that on as if it's inherent to who we are.
As if it's a badge of honor. It is the worst state that you can be in.
Yeah, it's something that happened to us. It's not a defining characteristic of who we are.
Especially as survivors, right? If you want to move forward, and if you're going to call yourself a survivor, then you have to walk like it, be like it, and move like it. And that doesn't Anyway, you and I can go on for
Yeah,
hours,
yeah.
but what I want to do is this is the first episode. We're gonna have her come back, I promise, because we're gonna unpack grief, we're gonna unpack loss, we're gonna unpack guilt. So thank you for being here
Of course,
with
this
us,
is
and I know
amazing.
that if I was as engaged in this conversation, I hope our audience was as well.
Yeah.
Can you tell everybody where they can find you and what resources you have available?
Absolutely. So, Pauline the psychologist, I'm on Instagram. That is my outpouring of love. That's the place I educate and bring the community in. That's a free resource that really I needed growing up. I also have a group practice called Noor Therapy and Wellness, and that's for residents of California and New York if you want culturally affirming therapy. And then I also have a business called Bridging Gaps, Breaking Cycles, where I do coaching and consulting and speaking. And so it's a little bit of everything. I've got free resources all the way up to month-long, very high-touch, one-to-one programs. So go and check me out on Instagram, and from there you'll see the links to all my free resources as well as to traditional therapy and other offers.
Well, thank you for spending the afternoon with us.
Absolutely. Thank you for
come back,
having
right?
me. Yes,
You're
I
gonna come back.
absolutely will.
Yeah, we're going to talk some more about your wellness. It's been an important journey for me, particularly this last year,
Yeah.
the last 5 years, to be honest. I've done a lot of growing and expanding, and I want to make sure that I offer the platform for you to have the same opportunity to heal, grow, and feel empowered as I have. So thank you for joining me. I'm Silva Harapetian. I'll see you next time.